Hello, listeners. Thank you for tuning in, and welcome to Tea Time, the name of my podcast today. I am Naya, your host. My tea of the day is ginger and orange. It's a really good tea. I hope you are cozied up with your own cup of tea or drink of choice and are ready to listen to me talk for the next 10 minutes or so. I hope you're looking forward to the topic I'm going to introduce to you. So let's get started. Like I said, my name is Naya. I'm an art history major, and I've been an art history major for about a year or so not that long, but I've always had an interest in art history. I've always loved it. I've always studied it. I studied it in high school a bit, and I'm really happy I can study it now for my degree and the rest of my career. So yeah, I've always had an interest in this kind of thing. So this research was really fun for me because I love digging my nose into things that have to do with art and just going down the rabbit hole. So I hope you find this interesting. The topic today we're talking about is digital art. Specifically, the whole debate in the art community about digital art versus traditional art. Now, I've known about this debate for quite a while. I was also a part of the debate for a while until I did more research on it. So I'm happy to shed light on the situation and sort of explain what's going on. So essentially, the debate is, in the art community, that digital art is not as serious as real art and shouldn't be considered as such because it's quote-unquote cheating because of the colors that are available in the digital art programs and all the brushes and stuff, which a lot of people have different opinions on, but I just wanted to share that with you. So I was confused when I found that digital art wasn't as a quote-unquote serious art form as traditional arts like painting or sketching or sculpture, because people think animators are really good digital artists, but they're not taken unseriously. Or even graphic design is considered a digital art, right? But graphic design is a really, really renowned job. It takes a lot of work, and there's a lot of graphic designers in the design field today, especially since digital art is so up and coming. But something about digital art, specifically the digital art that tries to emulate traditional art, that puts people on the sort of edge, and there's some controversy with it. So first, let's get into the background history of digital art. So, believe it or not, the first computer for everyday homes was invented in 1981, which is insane because that wasn't that long ago, only about 40 years or so, which is twice my age. It's double the time I've been alive, but it doesn't seem that long ago at all. It's crazy that computers have only been around for only 40 years or so. It feels like they've been around forever, probably because I've always grown up around computers. But I just thought that was an interesting little fact. And because of this new digital age that was happening in the world, a lot of artists were interested in forming digital art. How can artists create something so they can be a part of this new digital wave of sorts? So an artist named Harold Cohen, who was also a programmer, created the program called Aaron in 1982. Now, Aaron is a really interesting code, I found out. It's not necessarily the same as digital art programs today. It's not like Microsoft Paint or anything where you take the computer mouse and draw. It's actually almost an AI program that creates art in itself. Like the code creates its own art based on a couple of qualifications that the user can put in. The art is really beautiful, created by Aaron. I really loved it. You should check it out. AARAN drawing program. It's these beautiful, like, abstract pieces in bright colors. It's really gorgeous. And I was really impressed by the fact that this was only invented in 1982 because the art is amazing. Like, it's really, really great. And I don't know, I just thought it was really, really interesting that he invented this as soon as possible. But best believe after that program came out, every computer company wanted to make an art program. So we had Mac Paint, Microsoft Paint, and a bunch of others from then until now. Of course, Mac Paint has been around for a long time because Apple's been around for a long time, Microsoft even longer so. And since then, there are probably about 100, maybe probably more than that, different art programs out there in the world right now. When you think about it, a lot of things can be considered digital art. Even apps like Snapchat or Instagram can be considered art because you just take a pen and draw. It's not really that difficult, right? And people can create amazing pieces on these like Snapchat and Instagram stories, which is really, really funny to me. People will spend hours creating these tiny digital pieces to go on your cell phone. And they're really, really beautiful, actually. But side note, but a lot of digital artists started taking up this movement, and it was for a long time considered a really cool art, but something sort of changed. And I think it was around like 2011 when Procreate came out, when digital art started to change. Now, the digital art I'm talking about isn't necessarily graphic design because that's a whole nother ballpark. I'm talking about digital art in terms of it emulating traditional art or looking like a painting or a traditional sketch. So Procreate came out in 2011, and that was when the art world really opened up to digital art. Like, it was accessible to so many other people. I used it when I was a kid, and many other people used it, especially with a lot of social media platforms where people could share their artwork. It was easy to just make little fan arts or drawings or whatever so quickly through these art programs. So it did become a lot accessible to everyone, but because there were so many quote-unquote unserious pieces being put out there on the internet, it wasn't taken as seriously as some traditional drawings. Now, I do kind of understand, because when I first think of digital art, I do kind of think of those little fan art pieces I'd see on Instagram or something like that, or those hyper-realistic eyeballs people drew on the Instagram Explorer. But I think it's a lot deeper than that, and there's so much you can do with digital media. But that's a different story. So there are a lot of pros and cons when it comes to digital art. I found that I actually found something on the Art Educator's website. So it was talking about the pros and cons of digital art in general, and one of the cons is that technically your art will never be truly original if you draw it digitally, which at first I didn't quite understand. And I know what you're thinking, okay, every art piece is original because you drew it yourself, but technically that's not the case when you really think about it. All these digital art programs have created brushes and colors preset, meaning you didn't make those brushes or colors yourself, and that a computer program or the programmer made them. So technically you don't own those brush strokes and those colors. And I'm talking about ownership in a loose sense here, just when it comes to creating artwork. But when it comes to brush strokes and things like that, you made them, but you also didn't, because there's this sort of stable and set look that it will always have, especially in other pieces. And especially since programs like Procreate and MS Paint have grown so popular, artists have created their own brushes for others for free use. There are even brushes to create eyelashes and textures and all this other kind of things. Leaf textures I've even seen. So when other artists use those brushes on their artworks, do you call those artworks original? Because the idea is original, but the actual technical aspect of it isn't. So I kind of understand why some art educators are on the fence about letting digital art become a big part of our education, especially when it comes to AP submissions and submitting them to the College Board. I remember when I took AP art in high school, we weren't allowed to submit pieces digitally. Having drawings we made in Procreate or something like that. And at first I was really confused because I was like, well, is it really that big of a deal? But I do kind of understand that technically there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts of whether, oh, is that really your piece, or did you trace, or did you copy someone else's layer, da-da-da-da-da. There's a lot of gray area in between when it comes to originality in that standpoint, which is a big con for digital art. Another one I found when I was studying an article from the New York Times was talking about the value of digital art, like the monetary value. And because there's a lack of uniqueness that unfortunately almost every piece of digital art has, it means they're not worth very much at current time, because it's so easy to copy and emulate off of the internet. And plagiarism is huge, especially for art these days. There's so many programs where you can trace and all these other things. So when it comes to buying digital art, it's not a good investment, at least not right now, for art curators and things like that. However, I think there are still a lot of pros that I found when it comes to digital art. The same art educator's website I found also talks about a lot of pros, talking about how digital art is shareable and convenient, meaning it's easier for everyone to do art now. It used to be a lot harder for people to do art, even digital art when it first came out, because not everyone had a computer back then. And especially with traditional art, when art first started, you had to become an art apprentice. There were a lot of steps to becoming an artist. But now, especially with digital art, almost everyone has a computer nowadays, or at least a cell phone, meaning that almost everyone can do any kind of art. Like I said, even Snapchat can be home to really, really amazing pieces. So I think it's just a matter of what you choose to do with what you're given. I think it's really interesting that digital art is a lot more shareable. Everything on the internet is a lot more shareable now because of social media and things like that. So I think that's a really big pro, honestly, because one of the main goals of art is to communicate with others and share a message to others. So I think social media is a really big play in accomplishing that. Now, as for traditional art, there are a lot of pros to traditional art as well. The art educators also talked about how traditional art allows younger artists to form a certain connection with art that digital art would not allow, which at first I was a little like, does that really make sense? But when I thought about it, it did make sense. When I began to do art when I was around 4 or 5 years old, right? I only did traditional art. That was only what was available to me in those little community center classes. But I remember loving the feeling of the paint on my hands and the chalk and the mess and the paper and the smells. And forming that connection from such a young age made me into the art lover that I am today. And I'm not saying that digital artists will lose that connection, but it probably is a lot more difficult to form because digital art is such a quick process compared to traditional art forms. So I do think it's important from an educator standpoint to give students both options to form that deeper connection with art that they might not get as they grow older or they might not understand. So I thought that was a really good point that was made. Cons of traditional art, I think it would just be in contrast to the accessibility that digital art has, especially when you're younger and you can't pay for things on your own. Because so many people have access to a phone, it's just a staple nowadays. It's easier to get access to these kind of programs rather than going out and buying the supplies for art. Unfortunately, it can get expensive, it can get time-consuming, and it's not always the best choice for a lot of people. So I see benefits to both. However, the concept about digital art being cheating, now I found that a lot of art educators actually disagree with that fact, despite the fact that it isn't allowed, quote unquote, in a lot of digital art submissions and things like that. And it's mostly because when you submit things digitally, the art educators want you to showcase your skill. And not to say that digital art is not a skill, but they want you to showcase different kinds of skills that digital art would not be able to give. So for example, in digital art, it's the same process whether you choose to make it look like a painting or you choose to make it look like a chalk sketch or a marker sketch, what have you. But when it comes to traditional art, the process is always different. And just the handling of the materials allows for a different building set of skills each time, which from an educator standpoint, I understand is really important. So that was the reason I found out that a lot of art educators and things do not allow digital art submissions, not necessarily because they find it less serious, which is what I used to think at first. I used to think, oh, well, okay, Procreate artists just do like silly little things and draw stickers to sell and draw like little fan arts that they post online to their friends and things like that. But there are a lot of interesting things that can be created through digital art. There's a lot of pieces even on Snapchat that have beautiful, beautiful outcomes and are actually showcased in museums. So it's all just, like I said, what you do with what you're given. And I think digital art is just so different than traditional art that it's such a broad topic that you can't really say, oh, this is not art and this isn't. Like, where do you draw that line as to what exactly art is? I don't think there's one definition for that, and it can't actually be defined. Even in textbooks, there's no definition for just the word art. There are many different forms of art and what the connections are to make that certain art form, but there's no actual definition just for the word art, at least not one that I find is cohesive enough through different sources to it to make sense. So art is definitely subjective, and I think that's the beauty of it and the whole point. So I think what different artists need to understand is that this prejudice within the community about digital art versus traditional art is baseless in information and is a waste of time. Because not only is it already difficult enough to be an artist, especially now in the times we're in, but the digital age is so up and coming and it's only going to grow that it honestly makes so sense for the art community to fight against each other. So I think because the digital age is only going to get more and more advanced, one day we might even have 3D digital art. Who knows? There's already 3D printing. Who knows where things could go from here? And there's so many progressions every day. And there's this one quote I found that I really loved from the visual arts department at WordPress. And the quote is, "The term digital will be replaced once this trend has ended and historians can view it in perspective." And I really love this quote because it's thinking about, in the grand scheme of things, this digital age is just another stepping stone towards the future of art. And there are already so many different art eras that exist already, and this is just another one that's going to move into a different one. And so this debate that the art community is having is just a waste because in the end, it's going to be just another stepping stone in the art world. And I think that the artists who say, oh, digital artists have put in no effort and it's not fair, da-da-da-da, well, there are plenty of quote-unquote traditional artists who have put in very little technical effort and still have a lot of attention and impact. For example, Andy Warhol. You don't have to be an artist to know who Andy Warhol is if you just say the urinal. I think everyone knows about the urinal sculpture that Andy Warhol presented to the museum. And he started an entire art movement with just that one piece. And the movement he started was called Dadaism. If you don't know what Dadaism is, it's essentially art for art's sake, bringing meaning to something that initially had no meaning. And I think for him it was important because it gets people to look at art in a different way. And it gets people to question, okay, what is art and what is not? And I think that's the same situation for this digital versus traditional art debate. You need to really think about what is considered art and what isn't. And I think it's challenging people to rethink their opinions and their stances on this issue. And even our educators have changed their minds a bit, because it used to be a lot stricter in terms of, digital art, it's not the same set of skills, so therefore you can't be a part of this or you can't be a part of that. But it's not that digital art is easier or harder than traditional art. It's just such a different set of skills that there's no point in judging them on the same spectrum. And I don't know, I think that's really important to learn. Now, I have a new love for digital art that I didn't have before, because I'm a traditional artist at heart. I always will be. But I found that digital art is still just as important. And I think that all art forms should be accepted because we're all part of the same community. We're all a part of the art world, and there's no point in just fighting about this. And art is meant to be a form of expression. And I think that both digital art and traditional art accomplish that. So in the end, it's all art. And that's just what I wanted to say. I hope you enjoyed listening to my rant today. I hope you learned something. Even if you're not an artist, I still hope you enjoyed listening to my little tidbits. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.